welcome to Rock Book Show. Look at us in McKinley Park out here in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Looking awesome. I am with Katherine Turman and John Weiderhorn. And it's John Weiderhorn, just in case you didn't get that properly. These guys are behind this chaos. Louder Than Hell, the definitive oral history of metal. How did this collaboration actually come together?
Well, it's interesting. I started out working on a book on Judas Priest. I was going to be doing an authorized biography on the band, and after we'd gotten into the process a little bit, the band was dragging their heels, and it became pretty clear that they weren't really ready to do the book. So my agent said, okay, well, this isn't happening, but I'd love to still do something with you. You know, what else do you got? And I said, well, I mean, you know, it seems like there are a lot of great books about metal, but there's never been an oral history of metal. And I mentioned to him that, you know, the great classic oral history book about punk rock called Please Kill Me by Legs McNeil and Gillian McCain. And, you know, what a compelling read it is. And even if you don't know or love punk rock, it just drags you in. And I said, what if we did something like that? You know, what if I were to do a metal book in that style? And he said, you know what, I love it. It sounds perfect, but you can't do something like this alone because this is a major ordeal. You're going to interview what, like 100 people? And it turned out we interviewed 400 people. So he said, you know, I think you should think about bringing someone in as a co-writer and someone who has interests that complement your own. And Katherine was from the West Coast, I'm from the East Coast, and we like, you know, slightly different forms of metal, although we meet in the middle on a lot of bands. And we've known each other for a while, so I just immediately thought she'd be the perfect co-writer.
Yeah, I think a while being since the late 80s, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, I was at a magazine called Rip in LA, which was a rock magazine published by Larry Flynn. He was one of our great writers. I mean, back in the day, though, we didn't even have, it might have been pre-email, so, you know, you'd fax stories in, you'd talk on the phone, so we got to know each other, you know, just long distance, and we met a few times when I'd visit New York. And then I moved here about 7 years ago. Okay. To work with my Alice Cooper radio gig, and then, you know, we became closer since we're in the same city, and, you know, you would find us on the prong boat sailing around the harbor.
Yeah.
So, and I was really honored that he asked me because people had always said to me, you know, when are you going to do your book? I'm like, I don't want to tell my stories, but this format, like John said, the oral history, it's so perfect for two journalists with huge archives because we could dig into those, and then of course new interviews to interweave. It was a win-win situation for me.
Yeah, and these guys are great storytellers. Are they amazing? I mean, I could sit all day and listen to these tales.
And we did, not again and again and again. Yes, transcribing a book like this was the killer thing. As John mentioned when he first met with his agent, he's like, yeah, you do 100 interviews. And I think we ended up with, was it 400
More
ultimately?
than 400.
More than 400.
Yeah. And
so.
most of them were brand new. There was archival stuff because we were unable to obviously
Speak to the dead.
well, yeah, that's one way to put it. Yeah.
Always a problem.
Yes.
You know, so I had old interviews with Ronnie James Dio, and we had, you know, material from Lane Staley, and even you did with the last interview, or one of the last interviews.
Dickie
with
Peterson and Blue Cheer.
Right, exactly.
And then there's the people who don't speak anymore, or at least in public, I'm sure they speak. I've seen them on stage, like Axl Rose, for instance. But I, you know, being from LA, I did a lot of stuff around the Appetite for Destruction time. So we were able to use those interviews.
Are you ever surprised at how well people can recall things given what they've lived through?
Well, I think maybe they kind of get information from others, then recreate the moment, and then it becomes the new myth. And something we found in the book, as I guess may be true with other oral histories, you talk to all the members of band about a specific incident. They each have different remembrances, which is what makes it so fascinating.
You mentioned this is a chronological history as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Everywhere you go, everybody you talk to, you know, people have different opinions about metal. But the one thing everyone has in common is pretty much the idea that heavy metal started with Black Sabbath. And we agreed with that entirely in terms of where the metal chords and the metal aesthetic began. But then we thought, what happened before Black Sabbath? What was it that drove Black Sabbath to create the sound that they conceived and that they, you know, rode for decades? So we did some digging, and we looked into the sounds of power chord riffs and the meaning of metal and the origins of the term, the bands that influenced Sabbath directly, like definitely Jimi Hendrix, definitely Led Zeppelin, even Jethro Tull. And we found this commonality. And then we looked back at what was happening in the States at the time around when Sabbath was,
Yeah, late 60s.
yeah, and realized that there were some great bands. Blue Cheer, it was Summertime Blues, was one of the first, real proto-metal anthems. And then you had the Stooges, and you had the MC5, and Alice Cooper. So there were these other bands that were really laying the foundation that Sabbath ran with. So that's really what we ultimately decided to begin with, was these people that created the template for Black Sabbath, and then we really dug into Black Sabbath's history, and then from there it was, off to the races.
Yeah, and this is as current as it could be too, right up to the day.
We wanted to stop with the people who were clearly a great influence to the music of the aughts, the 2000 and up. So you have Machine Head, and you have Hatebreed, and you have Lamb of God, of course, and Mastodon. And while all these bands have slightly different sounds, or in some cases dramatically different sounds, they all kind of took what came before them and brought it to a new level. Certainly Slipknot fits into that category. But now the latest trend seems to be bands that have branched off from Avenged Sevenfold. Black Veil Brides is one, Asking Alexandria is another. But the funny thing is, they're bringing in a lot of elements of 80s metal, 80s melodic hair metal. So everything does kind of come full circle, and when people rediscover the past, sometimes that's what they inject into what they're doing now. Also, bands have gone as fast as they possibly can, so you're seeing the resurgence of doomy bands that are bringing music that comes from the bowels of Black Sabbath, and Ghost is one of them. There's actually tons of them right now. Electric Wizard are a really cool band. The Sword were sort of a hipster band, but definitely came from a Sabbath mold. So yeah, there are so many ways to express yourself within the field, and I think that's one of the things that keeps metal exciting and vibrant, and prevents it from becoming, like a genre of the hour.
I actually liked, and maybe you're the best person for this, Catherine, because it involves Alice Cooper quite a bit, the theatricality of metal and dissecting that a little bit, and when it came in and how crucial it is now, really, to the scene.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, throughout the book, people talk about the evolution of their makeup, their clothing. Especially one great story is even Judas Priest. In the early days, they were kind of flowy, diaphanous kimonos and that sort of thing.
Right,
And
they
so,
had this hippie-ish
yeah,
sort of
totally,
vibe,
totally.
yeah.
And then Rob Halford tells the story of how they got the iconic leather biker look, and I think he said it something about what it was, his little black dress. It was that, like, his jacket was that, integral to the whole thing. And of course, everyone else picked that up. And even today, bands like Ghost are definitely doing something in that theatrical thing that was, of course, started with King Diamond and Alice
Even
and
before,
Manson.
well, Alice for sure, but the cool thing was every band kind of saw what was going on and tried to up the ante or put their own spin on it. So you had the theatricality of Alice Cooper and, beheading himself on stage and hanging himself. And then in later years, you have Marilyn Manson, who's tearing up Bibles and, slashing himself with a shattered light bulb, which of course Iggy Pop,
Yes.
did years earlier. But there's been this theatricality, this drama that's kind of existed in metal through the ages, and just the music really lends itself to intense theatrical performance. It's all about excess, and it's all about just sheer spectacle, and that's one of the fun things about metal.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Eddie with Iron Maiden. You have your mascot, who is, on every T-shirt of every metal-loving kid in the world, and he's on every album cover, and he kind of morphs and changes. But I mean, he's he's in the band, another member of the band.
Yeah, and maybe the pinnacle of all that is hair metal in the 80s, and then it became all about the outfits and the makeup and the hair. And I remember Stephen Pearcy saying we were wearing chicks' clothes because we wanted to get more chicks at our show. So we had these girls helping our, refine our looks, and that's an amazing chapter in the book too.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think, of course, that's how the Alice Cooper band, when they first moved to LA in the late 60s, lived in Laurel Canyon. They got, like, the girls together outrageously, the GTOs, which were, Frank Zappa's proteges, I guess. They gave a lot of their clothes to Alice Cooper and the band, and that's how they ended up with a lot of tattered girl stuff. And yeah, that pretty much stayed in LA. I was born and raised there, so I was definitely going to see Poison and Guns N' Roses before they were signed, and seeing the evolution of all that. So that
But then
was
it got scary when the guys in the band look more like the girls in the audience.
I remember my mother looking at a Poison album and thinking they were women. I mean, she was not alone in that, of course. And yeah, I had to
Cinderella,
correct her.
Faster Pussycat, it got even more, girly. And then that's when you got a reaction against it, I think, when there were all the people who were saying, this is wussy music, these guys are posers. And, Thrash evolved, and of course Metallica were the kingpins of that, but there was a band that it was around even right before Metallica, and in fact, Kirk Hammett was their original guitarist, Exodus, and their frontman Paul Bailoff was really a character in the thrash metal scene, and he really defined the idea of loathing posers. And he used to go up to kids who he would find wearing a Rat t-shirt or a Motley Crue shirt, and he'd say, either you let me cut that off your body with this switchblade, or I'm just going to tear it off myself. And so these poor helpless kids would stand by, and he'd shred it, and he'd wear the little tattered pieces of cloth around his arm. But everything comes full circle. It's really funny. In the book, Gary Holt, who's from Exodus, said that behind all the poser hating, they completely coveted the guitar styles and lyrics of
Warren
people
Martini,
like
George Lynch, all those guys, for sure.
And even Alice in Chains was a little glammy there at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, they evolved somewhat easily, whereas Pantera, as we talk about in the book, it wasn't such an easy evolution from, the glam look of the early days. Of course, it was before Phil Anselmo when Pantera started with the brothers, but,
That's not fair, though, because they were teenagers, and they were playing the bar scene. They started out doing covers. They didn't really know about thrash metal at the time. And when Metallica came around, I think they really did gravitate towards that.
Right.
But it took someone like Phil Anselmo to say, you
I'm
gotta
not wearing that.
Right, yeah, you gotta lose the makeup. You gotta take, grow your hair, but take out the hair gel. Let's just kick ass and not worry about what we look like. Let's worry about what we sound like.
Yeah.
And that was a really, crucial moment for them. The look of metal has always been extremely important, but, as Pantera defined it, without the sound, it just, it wouldn't exist,
Well, then I think as Spinal Tap defined it, the sights, the sounds, and the smells.
The smells.
Yes.
Watain,
Yeah.
Watain, that
is a
emphasized
particularly
the
pungent band.
smells.
Yeah.
That's a band that you have to wear a surgical mask to see, because there is so much blood, animal blood, and animal carcasses strewn about the arena that it's like a slaughterhouse. It just smells so bad that you might not make it through the concert if you're not cult enough.
But it ultimately is, as Rob Halford said, metal is metal.
Metal is metal. I mean, that was something funny in starting the book. We'd never written a book before. I had no idea how to begin. So, I was just kind of like, all right, what is metal? I'll start there. Completely horrible, terrible idea. Because I would ask that question to everyone I'd interview, and everyone would have a different answer or no answer, and people who I thought, you talk to Lemmy from Motorhead. Motorhead's not metal. So that was...
We're a rock and roll band like Chuck Berry.
Exactly, we're just a garage band, speed it up. Literally speed, I think he meant. But no, I mean...
He is Lemmy.
Yes, exactly. And so, yeah, that was very confusing and difficult. But I don't want to give credit to the wrong person, but I'm pretty sure it was Leslie West from Mountain, another band who actually mountain toured with Black Sabbath in the early days. But I think he said it was like porn. Metal was like porn. He couldn't really define it, but he knew it when he heard it. So that's what I go for. Though, again, maybe there's this band you've heard of called AC/DC.
Yes.
Yes, they're in the book. Are they metal? Debatable. Some people say yes, some people say no.
Well, that's part of the fun thing is we're getting a lot of feedback from people who are saying, how could you possibly have included nu metal, or how could you possibly include industrial? That's not metal,
Right.
But and where's my favorite band,
Thrash and Warlock,
or Vomitory? So I mean, metalheads are I think as passionate as any music fan, and they're vocal as hell. So they get louder than hell. Then our book louder than hell.
Now that I've actually talked to you two a little bit, I know I can ask you this question. What bands do you disagree on?
Well, There aren't too many, actually. Let me think. Who
What?
did we? Well, okay. John looked at. We were going through the photos, and he looked at a picture of Faster Pussycat and Tame Me Down. He's like, "Who is that? Where does that singer belong?" So he's definitely not. I hate to use the term
Come on,
hair
identify one guy in Mayhem.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
That's not to say I don't like it. It's just nothing I have, paid close attention to or lived with. Yeah, that's the thing. We're looked at as experts, which I suppose we are in metal, but no one can know everything about every band. So that's really, you stump the trunk. I guess, even Eddie occasionally gets stumped.
Sure.
So,
And
yeah.
I like Dokken. I like Rat. I don't like other hair metal bands as much. I won't name them.
You made sure Betsy from Bitch got in, I believe.
did. I have a
Oh,
fondness for that.
I made sure the Mentors got in, which is a very weird, nasty underground LA band who actually have tentacles that stretch to Dokken and all these other bands. It's kind of an odd thing.
But we both love Pantera, and I think we both love Cannibal Corpse, and there are bands that we do. Most bands, really. I mean, most good metal bands, I think we have an appreciation for, even if I don't love Skid Row as much as I love Lamb of God. I appreciate some of what Skid Rows have done, and I think there was a mutual understanding. But there was a little bit of head bumping because we had this 1,000-page book that we had to cut down to 750 pages. And that was when our personal biases came into play. And
Get more prong in there. How much accept do we have? Do we have enough in there?
I love prong, and I don't
know
think we
you
have
do.
any. We do have a little bit of accept.
Yeah, there'd be the thing. I mean, I would be lying in bed and be like, "Oh my God, we don't have any
Yeah.
so and so," and then I'd have to get up and say, "Yes, are they in the book? Or are they not in
No,
the
we'd
book?"
lose sleep thinking about who we omitted, and fortunately we got Richie Blackmore in there, even though he won't talk about metal now. But we had access to past interviews that friends had done and things like that. We got Kevin DeBro after he passed away because we had a friend who again had interviewed him and done a great interview with him. Same with Randy Rhoads. But one of the good things about an oral history is even if you can't get your source material, it's really cool because you can go around that and find out other people who hung out with him. So I talked to Randy Rhoads' mom. I talked to his brother. When we did the chapter about Thrash and faced the horrible accident that killed Cliff Burton. We talked to people who were around at the time, and some of the coolest stuff came from Scotty, and who was on tour with Anthrax. On the same bill as Metallica, and was right behind them in the bus an hour or two, and found out via a phone call what had happened, and we got his reaction and how he, so it was a really cool way to approach things that maybe we couldn't tackle firsthand, but we could tackle from different angles, and you don't see those angles, I think, in a lot of documentaries or in a lot of straightforward metal histories.
Yeah, like we talked to Michael Alago, a famous A&R guy. We talked to Vicky Hamilton, who was big in the LA scene and worked with Guns N' Roses and Poison. We talked to a model, a Penthouse model, Cheryl Ricks, and John got to do.
I talked to
John
Cheryl
got to do
Ricks.
that.
I chased down.
Yes, and she's in this wonderful photo that we have in the book that she helped us get from the photographer, where she is, cozying up in a little bathing suit next to Rob Halford, just showing what a virile stud he is.
And that's why I wanted to talk to her, not because of her affiliations with Penthouse or anything.
Not at all.
She's charming, and it was really great to talk to her and get this story about what it was like to be cozying up to Halford, who at the time was still closeted, but she knew he was gay. Everyone around knew he was gay. The label knew he was gay, but management, the label, all these handlers wanted him to be this icon of masculinity still, because that's what heavy metal was. Being gay in metal was taboo back then. And it was actually something that tore Halford apart for a long time, and he talks about it in the book.
And we also got a woman named Roxana Shirazi, who wrote a book about being like the last living groupie, and she has some really salacious stories. So we kind of got a little bit of something from everyone. Of course, Sharon Osbourne is in there. She's got such a great history separate from Ozzy. Even her dad was a famous manager, and so she's not some wifeager, as they call it. She's got a great business history also.
And speaking of history, This is amazing. It is. It is the
Good
definitive
segue.
history. Wasn't it pro? Yeah. Louder than hell. The definitive oral history of metal. John Weiderhorn, Katherine Turman, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for taking the time to read it and talk to us.